like to welcome you to our class on the compass of Zen teaching in Buddha Dharma University. My name is Wanji Dharma, and I'm going to be your professor for this course. Before we get started, I gotta apologize today. I'm getting over a week and a half long bout with the flu, and just feel clear enough, and my brain feels unjostled enough, so hopefully I won't cough a lot. So with that out of the way, I figured it probably would make sense to give you a little bit of background about myself, even though you probably read it in a lot of places. I began practicing Advaita Vedanta, as well as Vipassana meditation in 1986, with my first teacher, who was Swami Chittayana Siraj, and also in 1986 I took refuge vows with him. So Swami Siraj was actually lived with Sri Bhagwan Rajneesh. Some people know him as Osho, for 5 years in India prior to becoming a teacher. He doesn't like to advertise it much because of some of the issues that Rajneesh went through. But based upon that training, Rajneesh was very eclectic. And actually, in the later years of his life, he spent much of his time dedicated to the teachings of Dahui, which at the time I didn't realize. Dahui is actually the founder of Kanwa Chan. Okay. And also the Hua-Do method of insight. We call it today koan practice. So those interesting interconnections that appear later in your life are always worth looking into. So my direction, actually, though, has always been informed by Zen since my early college days at Cal State Long Beach, where I majored in psychology, and that's where I really was initially introduced to Zen Buddhism. So Swami Siraj used to talk often about koans, and they always intrigued me from the moment I discovered who Linji was and what Zen koans were, and there were so many interplays between that and my greatest iconoclast teacher that I always wanted to follow in psychology, and that was the great Fritz Perls. But he was also very clear that he was never formally trained in koan study, therefore he couldn't teach it. So after a few years of practicing with him, I felt like I really wanted to find a connection um, with an authentic Zen lineage. And in those days, I lived in Orange County in Southern California. The only thing available um, to anyone at that time were um, very culturally bound centers of Vietnamese and Cambodian Buddhism, uh, based upon all the immigrants that had moved into the areas. But every time I would call, one of these centers listed, if you remember that thing called the Yellow Pages back then, um, I'd get the answering machine usually, and it'd be in some foreign language, and it was like, okay, why bother? At some point, I had read some stuff about and heard about Joko Beck, and um, she was too far away for me to study with. So I had almost resolved myself to waiting until my son had graduated from college, and then I was going to sell everything and give up my existence and move to Japan to study in a monastery. Well, luckily I didn't have to do that. I worked in LA County, but for some weird reason, I had never ever decided to look for a Zen center in Los Angeles. I, if I look back now, for the life of me, I don't know why. But in 1989, I was at work, and I pulled out the local Los Angeles Yellow Pages and looked up Zen Buddhism, and lo and behold, there were two listings at that time. One of them was Dharma Zen Center on East Cloverdale, and the other one was the Zen Center of Los Angeles. Well, I called the first number, D over Z, alphabetical listings as they were. Got a message from somebody who spoke very clear English, talked about what it was, so I left my information and received a call back that evening. So I had met Zen Master Seung in early 1989, and also discovered that he had this thing called the Quantum School of Zen. So I immediately joined the organization and began practicing. So the purpose of this class, though, is the Compass of Zen. And actually, originally it was known as the Compass of Zen Teaching. So here, I don't have such sophisticated computer equipment, but if any of you have tried to purchase the book, by the way, this is out of print. It's a very thin document, which I find very intriguing, that we'll discuss later. But it's out of print because of the later version, which was culled from some of the videotapes that you're going to see during this class. What I like about the original format, and I've made that available on Lulu, I often get into arguments with Quantum School of Zen about whether it should be published. It's on there at cost. We received no benefit, but I find it a very handy guide. It also contains a calligraphy, the handwritten calligraphy of Zen Master Seung-Sahn. Excuse me. So, Zen Master Seung-Sahn wanted to come up with something to help his students understand the depth and the breadth of Zen teaching. And he didn't feel like, it was only just him. So it was a single Zen master kind of in a sea of openness, yet he wanted students to understand some of the fundamentals and the history, albeit he produced this document. So I must say, if you look at, I'm sure you guys have looked at the downloaded document if you buy it, but if you look at it, it's very succinct. It's almost, these are almost like Cliff Note records. And it's really, as far as Mahayana Buddhism goes, it's probably one of the greatest summaries ever to appear. So I find it a shame that it's out of print, just because it's a brilliant reference point. You don't have to search through 350 pages to find what you're looking for. In this document, it's 57 pages. And by the way, that's a little bit longer than the original format, and I'll discuss that in a little while. So I think a point should also be made that the original sutras were merely headings of the subject matter. When they first started writing them down, they were like the same thing that you see here. And then the individual teacher or master would use those notes, to go off of while he taught the various teachings of the Buddha Dharma. So, in the early days of the Quantum School of Zen, Seung-Sahn would offer these formal lecture series on this document quite often, actually, but they would go on for 5 days, and usually they would be 5 days in a row, and so they were focused on the local Sangha. So wherever the Sangha was large enough where they can get enough people, he would do it that way. In the videos that are the following rest of the class, it should be noted, that this was the very last time that Zen Master Seung-Sahn actually gave these lectures in public. and that was in 1994, I believe, December. Um, and he actually hadn't given them in public, to my understanding, since the late 1980s. So Seung-san formally retired from actively teaching new students, as it were, in 1987 on his 60th birthday. I find it important to note that the two monks, excuse me, that ran the Los Angeles Center, who were Muriang Sanim and Musong Sanim, both of which you will see in the videos, were his greatest patrons. And he always felt comfortable teaching in Los Angeles. Basically, when Seung-san was in the United States, he had two home bases. Excuse me 1 second. One of them was Dharma Center in Los Angeles, Dharma Zen Center, and the other one was the Providence Center, which is actually in Cumberland, Rhode Island. So he always felt a close affinity to the LA group. So Seung-san decided during a particular stay, during the winter of 1994, that he really wanted to teach the compass of Zen again. And it actually turned out that it's the last time he ever did it. Also, he special ordered a limited print edition of the Compass of Zen. And by the way, that was all white cover. The books that we were reading from, and they were bound just like this, perfect bound. But the original book was always spiral bound. But it was out of print even in 1994. So he special ordered these special books from Korea just so he could do this teaching. And he gave all the books away as a gift at the end of the class. He also recruited two Dharma teachers who at that time were living in the Bay Area, who were 500 miles north of Los Angeles, to participate. And I felt like, oh, what an opportunity. I had a video camera. And so I asked Musong Sanim if he would talk to Zen Master Seung-san at that time, if he would give me permission to videotape, and he said yes. Wonderful. So I feel lucky. This is actually the first time these videos have been kind of available to the public. I've been working for a number of years trying to get them enhanced, and have several people still working on them, but as of this time, to no avail. but I still do have the original media. So, these videos were all recorded on what was state-of-the-art consumer equipment back in '94. And the particular camera I was using ran on VHS-C, which was compact VHS tape. During the initial process, we've tried to enhance the video as it was converted to digital media, but the lighting's poor, and at times the audio drops out. But I can't repeat any more strongly. This is the only time that all 9.5 hours of lectures were recorded on video. There are a few recordings on cassette that hopefully have been transferred to digital media, but I'm personally not aware of those. So once you listen and go through this course, if you haven't already read The Compass of Zen, the entire book from Shambhala, which is 300 plus pages, you might want to do that. It might help you enhance your understanding of where this was coming from. I think the major importance here is that what's missing from the book is that you don't get to express Seung-san's or experience Seung-san's humor and his laughter, his seriousness, and also his presence. You have to pay very close attention to learn how Daesan Sanim or Seung-san talked. But once you do that, it becomes much easier. So I hope this doesn't become a problem to any of you. So, one of the purposes of this book was the fact that, in the Choge order, as well as all Buddhist orders in Asia, I don't care where you ordain, all right, Thailand, Singapore, Sri Lanka, doesn't matter. Part of the process is that you have to get an equivalent bachelor's degree prior to becoming a monk or a nun. So each and every Buddhist monk or nun actually receives 4 years of classroom study prior to their ordination. And that doesn't exist in the West. And I think we can understand why that Seung-san chose that this had to substitute for the formal education, which all of you are going through now. Like I said, it became like the Cliff Notes of Zen Buddhism. However, you don't get the fullest experience of it, and that's the reality. But this can be a guide, and it's a definite future guide to all of any future courses or references that you take. You can refer back to this and really get a feel for, oh yeah, okay. This is the essential point of this particular sutra. So, as you probably know, Sungsan arrived in the United States in mid-1972, um, began to learn English, and began to develop this book, The Compass of Zen Teaching. So as I said before, the original version is out of print. There's a link on the course site where you can actually buy a copy of on-demand print from Lulu. The other point is that I have expanded a few sections in the book which are not in the original release, as it were. And those are the points that we'll discuss after you guys go through the 5 lectures. And I will then try to break down in some detail, actually, some of the things that I think were left a bit confusing and left out of the discussion. I added some expanded diagrams in the book to explore relationships between Sungsan's derivation and their original links back to some teaching that you will find throughout your studies that were posed by other teachers. And I think those things are helpful for us to digest some rather complicated topics. I've also added a detail of the 12 links of dependent origination. That gets rather quick review in the videos, and so we will discuss that at the end. So the book itself is broken down into basically 5 major categories. The first one is the study of Hinayana. The second is the study of Mahayana. The third is really an expression of the Mahayana sutras. And the fourth is, the evolution of Zen Buddhism within the Mahayana structure. And the final is what we call Kongan practice. I do want to make a note here that although people throw that word around a lot, Hinayana, it is never ever meant to be used in a derogatory manner by any of the people using the term. Hinayana directly translated means the lesser vehicle. However, it can also mean, and this is how it's implied here, the early teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha. Those usually apply to the Pali canon and not the Sanskrit canon out of India. Okay. So when you hear people talking about the page numbers on what they're talking about, they won't represent it. I'll try to cross-reference them the best I can, but like I said, there's really less than 50 pages in this book, so it shouldn't be too hard to follow along. Also, as I said earlier, I've expanded many of the points and added indexes and further research to help in students' understanding. And again, those are going to be reviewed in the last 2 lectures of this coursework. Also, when you get back to the last chapter, as it were, the text is titled Mind Meal. And a little bit of interesting comment about that is that when Seung-san was working on this, and he was working with some students to translate his words, he was saying mind mirror, not mind meal. But again, this particular person doing the translation heard mind meal. Okay, as you know, Asians sometimes have difficulty pronouncing the R's, and so that's what it sounded like to this person. So once the mistake was discovered, Seung-san, and it was explained to Seung-san, he decided to leave it in the original book and to not change it, because he felt like mind meal, mirror is always the undiluted mirror mind of Zen. But he also felt that for koans, mind meal hang on a second, meant that we had to digest our understanding, and that's what these koans are about, is how do we see through all of this delusion. So just as a highlight, basically, the book doesn't go through all, obviously there's way too many sutras to do in such a short period of time. But the major sutras that are covered in this are the Heart Sutra, or the Prajna Harita Sutra, Prajna Paramita Harita Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, the Mahaparinirvana Sutra, the Lotus Sutra, the Huayan Sutra, which is Avatamsaka, the Flower Ornament Sutra. And those are some of the basic sutras of Zen Buddhism, surely not all of them. So many of those other courses are discussed in other classes that we have. So I hope you all enjoy this journey and this trip we have. And I look forward to interacting with all of you. And I'm here to answer any questions you might have. Feel free to ask. You can do that, during the quiz lectures as they are. And I want to thank you for your dedication to the Dharma first. And secondly, I'd like to thank each one of you um, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to actually do something to give back to this world. And that's really, I think, the most important gift that we, can take in and then return it back. So, again, many bows to each one of you, and don't hesitate to ask if you don't understand. That's our job. Thank you again.